Zoom. Yes, we're live on Facebook too. All right, so my name is Leanne Payne. I'm the Executive Director of Wild Bird Trust. I'm happy to be welcoming you all to this talk tonight. The end of September already, my goodness, how does this happen? And the Habitat Committee and Research Subcommittee of the Habitat Committee have been busy over the summer. Tom was involved, Tom, who's going to be making the presentation tonight, who's on our board and is instructor of biology at Capilano University. He, along with some of our summer staff and Chloe Hartley, the co-chair of our Habitat Committee, and a few other awesome volunteers joined our research committee to do an inventory of our research projects. And one of them is the monthly bird counts that some of you have been on, I would hope, and also are aware of that it's a consistent activity. We've had to kind of draw back a bit with the lockdown and keep it safe. So we do have a couple of community members conducting the bird counts so that activity continues, but Tom's been doing some work looking into how we've been conducting them and is going to share some insights and information about that tonight. So I'm just going to hand it over to you now, Tom. And unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was just jumping on that. Apologies, I just had to give a last little reminder to my children before I began that they might want to go to the top of the house rather than where I am. But they're out of the way now, conveniently. So I'd like to just begin by introducing myself. I'm Tom Flower, as Anne was just mentioning. I noted I didn't put that down on the front here. And I really want to respectfully acknowledge that we are all probably residing on the territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular I'm in the regions of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and so I respectfully acknowledge that we are on their territories. And I really want to talk to you today about what we've been planning to do with the Maplewood bird counts. And this will be a little bit of a journey about what's their value, what we've been doing historically, and maybe what we can do in the future. So let's trundle along. Just to give you an idea, I've been doing bird research since I was a kid. I just was lucky, I liked them, and that was what I ended up doing, and spent quite a lot of time in different places around the world. Sometimes the birds are watching me, though, as I found when I worked for a particular bird in South Africa for a while, which liked to steal food from other animals, including people sometimes. So there's a drongo on my back at this point. However, I came to Canada in 2015, and I've been here working at Simon Fraser University and now at Capilano University as a biology instructor and researcher. It's been a wonderful experience, and I wanted to find a way to incorporate some of the work I did with the local community and maybe contribute to some of those amazing bird places around here in just the same way that I was able to explore bird habitat when I was a kid. So that's what I've been looking to do. And the bird counts were appealing to me because they're such a wonderful way to get people involved in science. But why do we count birds? What's the point of it anyway? One reason is to really think about what the benefits of the environment are to us. This is kind of an anthropocentric view of the world, because if we look at the abundance and diversity of birds, it gives us an indication of the health of our ecosystems, and we know that those ecosystems provide us with numerous services that support us. So you might just want to count birds to detect whether there are any unpleasant changes happening to the systems that support us. Many of you know that we've lost nearly 4 billion birds in North America since the 1970s. Where have those gone and why? And is that potentially a risk to humans? That would, for example, be a good reason to do a bird count. But you might have a more sort of biocentric approach to the environment where you want to look at the value maybe of organisms in their own right. In which case we would want to know what's happening to our populations of birds and other animals so that we can better steward them now that we have impacted their environment. And humans use over 40% of terrestrial area of the planet, that they've modified it in some way. So it's undeniable that we do have a role in stewardship, given that we are manipulating all that land. And then the final reason is because we like them, and we like talking to each other about them and sharing the enjoyable experiences we have. This is something that's very easy to understand. And I think it's a mixture of both of the above points. And that's really kind of where I think I lie. So there are some good reasons to do bird counts, but how do we really go about doing them? And this is, I'm trying to allude to the fact that there's citizen science, there's community science, but really anyone who goes out and does a bird count is really just doing some science. You don't need to qualify that in any way. It's just good science. And the reason is that normally we start off when we start doing a bird count by asking a question. Many of you might be interested in how do the populations change from one year to the next? Why am I seeing so many Anna's hummingbirds in the winter? Or what's the impact of increased oil tanker traffic on populations of western grebe? These are the kind of questions which we might ask as just people looking at our environment. And then we kind of come up with our hypotheses for why, our explanations. Maybe it's just because we're feeding all the Anna's hummingbirds so much winter fuel. Perhaps we're reducing western grebe numbers because of pollution and disturbance in their environment. So, you know, we come up with our ideas, but then we need to really go out and see whether we are correct in our expectations. And that's where our bird count comes in. So we go out and we collect some data, and then we share our findings. And today what we're going to do is we're really talking about point 3. And then hopefully in a follow-up to this talk in a year's time or 2 years' time, we can do a little bit of point 4 here. And tell you about the patterns that we're seeing at the Maplewood Flats. So I'll give you a brief history now of what's been happening at the flats historically. There's sort of 3 major thrusts to the bird counts. The first would be the ongoing counts that have been happening almost monthly since the early 90s, when the Wild Bird Trust was first established and the Maplewood Flats Committee was first established. And so initially those are a little bit ad libitum, and then increasingly those became organized into the monthly bird count. And I'll talk about the methods a little later. That's a long-term database, very valuable resource. The next component was our monitoring of the purple martins and the putting up of nest boxes to support that population in 1992. And then finally we had some sort of ad libitum observations, either through eBird or people's personal counts that they've held, and that's particularly useful for things like the shorebird and seabird populations. Okay, this data has already been published. There's a lovely document written by Brooks, which is available, although we're trying to find the original data in electronic form, and summarizes much of the patterns of bird populations at the flats. And like I say, I want to talk about that at a future meeting once we've collated all the data. We've also had tremendous successes monitoring the purple martin. It's incredible, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute in my next slide. And in terms of shorebird and seabird monitoring, there are some alarming trends, which at the present point in time are a little bit anecdotal because we don't have that long-term bird count data. And in a sense, this illustrates how important it is to keep that data. So let's just look at the Purple Mountains as a great recovery success story. Back in 1985, 1980, we had about 10 purple martins in the whole of BC. Now that population has boomed right up. We're over 1,000 individuals now. And for a while, the largest colony in the Lower Mainland was the Maplewood Flats colony, which was a nest box colony. So this was a real success story where we promoted the recovery of a species that had lost its natural nesting habitat. So hopefully we can continue to support that kind of project and monitor their recovery. Generally speaking, our bird counts have now recorded over 245 different species of bird. So there's a lot at the flats, and there are all kinds of unusual things. Can anybody spot the non-Canadian species here that I slipped in by accident? Maybe it's a birder's question. Bottom left is a Pririt batis. That was one of my favorite birds from South Africa. They were all flying away above my head. But we've got a ton of different things. For example, those northern goshawk, there was a female that was overwintering in the Maplewood Flats for the last 2-3 years. I don't think she was here this last year, but that's a fantastic habitat to support a very low abundance and infrequently seen bird. And of course, we know about the recovery with the ospreys returning in the mid-90s. So this is really a fantastic story to show the kind of diversity we have in this small patch. So I'm going to tell you a little bit now about how we've been doing our counts, and then we can talk about what we might want to do differently in the future, because this is a sort of what's the state of affairs now, where should we go next kind of chat. So first up, some of you might know about the monthly bird counts that happen on the first Saturday of the month at 8 a.m. And a team of birders go out, normally with a couple of experts, and then people who want to come along and learn about birds. And what they'll do is they visit 26 sites, and at each site they stop for 3 minutes and record the birds they hear or see, and how many of those bird species they hear or see. That's great, but then we also have to enter all that data. So it's put into a paper record form, which is then transcribed over to a computer. But that's a long process, a lot of time invested, and one has to keep up with those records. There are also a few issues which I've kind of been finding out through conversations with the many people who've been dedicated to this work. First up, the points are really close together. So you might see one bird and then walk over to the next point and the bird's kind of there as well. So then you have to remember to exclude that bird because you already counted it in the previous location. Now that's often a problem with point counts, but especially so when they're so near. Next one is going to be that what do you do with birds that are between points? Because you want to record everything you see, but maybe you'll miss that one. And so there was a tendency for some of the observers to maybe just put that bird onto the next bird count, or put it onto the count that it was closest to. But then you'll see that that wasn't within the 3-minute count, so they're already seeing some variation. And then finally, some of the sites might be kind of dull. People might skip over them a bit quickly. Others, particularly the one by the mud flat, might take forever to record all the different bird species. And so they would go longer than 3 minutes. And of course, people would be chatting. Sometimes if there are more people, more chat, less concentration, versus times when there were fewer people, people were very much attentive, listening out for what they could hear. So there's a lot of variation. And that's going to cause some problems. Now, as a scientist, this was alarming to me because I thought, gosh, there's an inconsistent method. How can this possibly be adequate scientific data? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this is a big database, and it's long and ongoing. And sure, we might not be able to perfectly distinguish between each of these different areas. And yeah, we can't assume that we had an equal effort at each site. So we may have overrepresented some sites in terms of what can be found there and underrepresented others. But the good news is that we've probably been relatively consistent in our inconsistency. So as a result, we probably do have a really good tell of what's on the reserve as a whole at any given point in time and how much of it's there. So the bird count data is going to be extremely valuable in that sense. There's nothing wrong with that because we've got the time when we started our counts, and we can work out the time when we ended as well. And so that's not an issue. And we can probably break into each of those areas as well and see which habitats support which species more frequently. So I'm not too worried, but I do want to try and iron that out if we can in the future. So let's move to the purple martin counts as the next component. Those boxes went up in 1992, as I mentioned earlier. Within 2 years, they were colonized by the first martins, which then consistently bred and colonized more and more boxes over time. In 2003, we began formal monitoring, and then after that point, we even began to band for a period of time to see if the longitudinal data on individual birds, whether they were returning to the same site to breed, all those kinds of questions. And we would look at those boxes. We would take them out in the spring and put them onto the pilings out over the water. And then we would return in the fall and look at them to see whether they had evidence of purple martins having bred within them and whether they'd done so successfully. And we kind of take some ad libitum observations of the different nest boxes to try and see whether they were purple martins using them or not. That would give us an idea of the relative success and number of pairs at the colony each year. But it wasn't a very formalized method. And so I think that there's perhaps a little bit of an effort needed to identify really whether we have a specific way of identifying if there was or wasn't a violet martin in that particular nest box or not, because it might just vary over time as new people come on board with the project and they might make decisions somewhat differently. It's also very hard work to keep going out to those pilings to put up the boxes. So maybe we should have a think about whether we could clean them in situ and therefore reduce that workload. So that's also a possibility, I think. Perhaps these birds would even prefer if the nest boxes had some established nesting material in. We don't know for sure. So that's food for thought. And I think that we will get together as a Habitat Committee to discuss the goals of that particular project and how to run that better. In particular, we need to collate all the data from all the years and ensure that that's digitized. So there's our issues. What's our problem here? We just don't know for sure where the data is, and we can't be 100% about what the data is showing and whether it's consistent over time. A couple of things really to deal with there. Finally, let's talk about the shorebird counts. We don't really have a shorebird count at the moment, but I perceive this as one of the most important things that we can add to the Maplewood Flats bird counts. Really, we want to know what's happening in the inlet. We know there are big fins afoot. We know that boating traffic is increasing. We know that there's variation in pollution levels. What would happen if there was an oil spill? Would we know what used to be there and whether that's changed? So we really need to get a good handle on that through some specific monitoring of the birds' populations down on the mud flats and out onto the open water. So I think that we need to replace those ad libitum observations with a proper protocol on that front. At the moment, we just don't really have a capacity to tell what is or isn't there, except for a few of our general point counts, which are done by the coast. Okay. So let's talk about future directions now. I've gone over our sort of 3 goals, as it were. We want to talk about improving our point count methods, improving our purple martin work, and really trying to incorporate some shorebird monitoring. And so I think what we would do ideally is, with respect to the historic data, try and centralize those databases. And that will enable us to really look at trends in bird populations afresh. We've done some before, but it would be lovely to take a look again. And I'm really keen to try and facilitate projects on that database with the local community or potential partners. Of course, I'm at Capilano University, so I'd love to encourage some of my students, especially who live on the North Shore, to try and have a look at that data and see what they find. There are others from BCIT who would no doubt also want to do similar things, and it would be a lovely goldmine for the Wild Bird Trust to make available as they see fit, because people are always looking for databases to go and explore what's happening in our environment. So let's then think about what we would do our current counts. We need to find some consistent methods and integrate, I feel, with other efforts at bird counts locally, provincially, and even nationally as well. So I kind of jumped the gun a bit with my historic bird count data. So sorry, I try not to be repetitive in this slide now. I've already mentioned that we would centralize. And now I'm going to give an indication of what we might do with some of those historical analyses. You might want to just look at particular species and then see whether their pattern of their population is increasing or decreasing, and whether there are particular times of year at which they might be arriving or departing that have changed, especially for summer migrants. There's lots of evidence indicating that summer migrants are now arriving earlier and earlier because of climate change. That would be fun to know. And as I was saying, with the data that we then generate, with those results that we generate from analyzing the data, we can then go a step further. We can start to inform the research and management plans that the Wild Bird Trust can then implement at the Maplewood Flats. So if we identify that there are particular bird species that are relatively vulnerable across BC, which are not doing well at the Maplewood Flats area, we can try and find out why, and then think about what we could do to support them, just as was done for the purple martin. And that was an exceptionally successful project as a result. I called them violet martins early, sorry. I was getting confused with violet greens. Anyhow. So we then go to our current bird counts, and I'll dig into this now. I propose that we modify those bird counts, but we do so in a way that makes the new data we collect compatible with the old data, while ensuring that we're a little bit more consistent between observers, and that we can really look at those different areas of the Maplewood Flats independently so that those data points aren't close together. And I think that we can do this by mixing up our methods to copy those used by Birds Canada, which is a subdepartment of Environment and Climate Change Canada. And that would be fantastic because then our data can feed directly into their broader studies. In addition, we all know that eBird is on the scene these days and people love using eBird. So it'd be rather nice if we were entering our count data directly to eBird too as we go around with our Saturday bird counts. And that actually goes straight to Birds Canada too. They use that data. It's become a really nationally valuable resource. So I feel there are a few things that we can do there. And funnily enough, all these 3 points can be wrapped into one thing, which is just a sort of small change in our bird count protocols. Let's think about how we can do that. Well, first of all, I'll tell you about the different projects that Birds Canada does. They've got 3 major ones. The Breeding Bird Atlas, which is essentially going to be a record of what species are where during the breeding season. Then there's the BC Coastal Waterbird Survey, which fills in that shorebird component I was saying earlier. And then finally, we've been identified as part of an important bird and biodiversity area and a critical part of that because the Burrard Inlet is of high value and we're one of the few remaining areas of mudflat on there. So we can make a great contribution to these 3 spears from Birds Canada. So just to give you an idea what the Breeding Bird Atlas does, on the right-hand side here, you can see a map showing red for hyperabundant and orange for less abundant for a particular species. And this is from bird count data submitted by the public. And it's for the bird in the top right, which of course is a spotted towhee. And you can unsurprisingly see that they are hyperabundant in the lower mainland. Anyone who's been to Maplewood Flats will know that that's one of the most common birds you're going to see along the path. So it doesn't come as a surprise to us, but actually across Canada, they are less frequently seen. So the way the Breeding Bird Atlas does its counts is that they have a standard method, and it's quite similar to ours, which is lucky. What they do is a 3-minute count, and then they do a second 2-minute count. And that's so they're compatible with other of their own count methods. So we can either continue to do our 3-minute one as we always have been, or we can just add on the extra 2 minutes to really match what they're doing. That would be good. The only subtle differences they have is a 300-meter separation minimum for their points. So we might think about implementing that. And then in addition, they are very strict. They only include birds seen and heard in the time allowed. And we'd have to be a little bit stricter about that because the goal is not to record everything. It's to have comparable points across time and across different areas. We as birders always love to get the biggest list we can. So if people want to do that, we can just run a simultaneous eBird list where they chuck on everything and it won't matter then. In fact, that will be really valuable. It will just be separate from the official point count list. So we just need to decide really whether we do want to constrain ourselves to only birds that we see and hear at any distance, or whether we'd want to just record ones maybe that we heard quite close to us. And then we'd need to think about those numbers of sites. And we'll chat together as a habitat committee and I'll receive feedback to make that decision. We really need to do something which is going to work for the people who do this on the ground, because there's no point in coming up with a fangled protocol if it's a pain for the people who have to go and collect the data and they don't want to do it. So I 100% want to respect those who really commit their time and energy to do this and make sure they are happy with what we plan to do. So next up is going to be those BC Coastal Waterbird Surveys. This is being spearheaded by I think Greg Sorensen. Gosh, I forget his first name. It's awful of me. And he works down at Delta in the offices of Birds Canada there. And what he's been trying to do is take on the long-term monitoring of shorebirds and really vamp this up by getting people to more regularly monitor BC shorebirds. You really need to know this because there's a lot of change going on in the Lower Mainland. We want to know what impact that's having on bird populations and their bird health, and this particular, the use of Burrard Inlet as a wintering site for birds, especially now we have this threat of increased tanker traffic. Okay. So the way this works is all these BC coastal waterbird surveys are done on a second Sunday in the month. I think it's the second survey, I'd have to go and double check. And they are done at one site where you undertake a full visualization of all the birds and classify how far they are from shore, what's present, etc. And so we just would require someone who would go and do that on that day reliably every month. And I believe that's something we could do quite effectively. And you can see that we would be providing the data point for region LMVN47, which would then contribute to the broader database for the whole program. And in fact, if you're very keen, you could go and choose some of those other blue quadrats to go and do the survey at as well. Okay. Lastly, the purple martin monitoring. I think we're doing a great job here. I think maintaining those nest box observations is fantastic. We just need to think about whether we carry on bringing them in and putting them back out, or whether we just clean them in situ, and let's just get that data together. I believe this is something we should try to pursue in collaboration with the local community. It'd be lovely if we can find someone who wants to spearhead that project and take it on. And we'll try and organize that through our Habitat Committee. So to sort of wrap up, what I've tried to get at here is that whenever we go out and we contribute to these kinds of observations with a question in mind, we're doing science. It's not an exclusive area. I think by intuition, all of us are scientists. We're always posing questions and thinking about how to explore our explanations. And really, by going out and contributing to our bird counts, we are doing that. And so this is a wonderful thing we can do as a community, and I'm really encouraging you to join in. It's also great fun. There are some incredibly knowledgeable birders on the bird counts, and we see some cool stuff. So please come along and join in. And with that, I think we can make a big contribution by just doing some small modified counts, introducing our shorebird surveys, and just updating our puma approach. And that will help us partner with other organizations in our community too, including universities and hopefully the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and others as well. Maybe schools, who knows? We just want to bring people on board to get involved in these processes. So I'm just going to end by saying a big thank you. There are too many people for me to thank almost at this point, and I'm still working out who's been doing the bird counts all these years, so I can make a long list to thank properly. And I'll do that when we come back and present some data. But suffice to say that Leanne Payne has been extremely wonderful in helping organise this event, along with, I appreciate all those on the Habitat Committee who have supported this too, and the chair, Chloe Hartley. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Does anyone have any questions, comments, opinions?
Great, thanks, Tom, for that. And there are some people on Facebook Live as well. I've invited them to put any comments or questions in there, and I can relay those here. But if anyone on the Zoom wants to unmute themselves or put their question in the chat, I welcome you to do that. I was certainly interested in what you were suggesting for the purple martins about leaving them in situ. That's provocative, and I really want to hear that discussion at the Habitat Committee. Mm-hmm. And the possibility of involving Tsleil-Waututh for that kind of work, given that it's right outside their village site. So yeah, neato, I learned a lot.
I think we all want to see the counts come on board again. It's a great way to reach out and join in this together, and I think that's what will be so nice. Of course, we just had to close down with COVID, so they are still being just an expert who knows their birds, but the social component, which is so wonderful, we're just missing right now.
That's great. Yeah, and if you organize it such, other people can easily, you know, as long as they know how to start identifying birds.
Yeah, I mean, when I came to Canada, I didn't know any of them, right?
Yeah, right.
Birds for 25 years.
Yeah.
But novice, and it's like what, 1-2 years, and you always remember them when you have that experience, like you have to see it to fix it in your mind. You know, I always remember the first time I saw each of those particular species I saw for the first time. I didn't tick it off. So I was like, oh, wasn't it wonderful when I was walking that time and it came down and ate a worm next to me or something? But, you know, that's the really good about those counts.
Yeah. And the frequency, the monthly, is that something we need to kind of stick to? Is that just an easy?
There's no reason to change that, I wouldn't say. That's very consistent with a lot of approaches. I think that we also just have people contributing through eBird all the time. And that's a really nice background database. So that's what I sort of feel like if we make this count, particularly the monthly ones have quite a set protocol. And then, you know, while people are doing that, they can just put in their eBird list, which is going to allow them to put in all the birds that they'd be frustrated at missing out on otherwise, you know. And then, I mean, the other component is no data is good data. So when you go to a spot and you see no birds and you spend 5 minutes sitting there, you think, well, that was a waste of time. Of course, that's the best data point of all because it demonstrates that we've got a problem and that there's something not happening in that habitat. We can have a look at what's going on there, what type of habitat is it, etc.
Yeah. Others on the call, have you been involved in the bird counts? I'm not recognizing all of you. Yeah.
I have taken part in some of them a while ago. I've also done Christmas bird counts in Arizona.
Oh, okay.
Not this year though.
Yeah. Thanks, Candy.
Mm-hmm.
Mary-Lal, weren't you in some of the bird counts? Yep. Yeah. Let me unmute you. Trying to unmute you. Won't unmute you.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
I have been on bird counts. Yeah.
Great.
I think it's a balance, isn't it? You don't want to make it such a dry experience that you detract from the enjoyment. So I do want to make sure that we retain this being a social event. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's not going to take too much to make this consistent with these national databases, which is great. Yeah. You know, I don't want that to come at the expense of us working as a community to go and count them and so forth.
I think I'll go ahead.
Oh, it's a mute off.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Suzanne.
We're very Canadian, very polite. Yeah. I'm Suzanne. I live near Maplewood Flats, and I belong to the Wild Bird Trust, but I haven't been on a bird count, basically because I have very few birds that I know how to identify. So I'm wondering, how many people do you have in each little group, and what kind of expertise do you need to qualify?
I'm going to talk about typical times because that's what we're aiming for longer term. So normally we have one or two sort of birders who lead the group, and they're responsible for really IDing. Someone will volunteer and just scribe, and then everyone else is a complete mixture. You know, people have been birding their entire life to people who have never birded before. I think that's the goal, is that you, in fact, it's an opportunity to learn those birds, because things you would otherwise be unsure about. There's someone there saying, oh, here's what you can look for, or here's what you listen for. So yeah, I think it's a very open club.
Okay, so it would be okay for me to come along as an inexperienced person then on a bird count. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's the goal. Again, we tend to sort of try to balance it out in terms of numbers. So normally it's sort of 6 to 8, so it's a manageable number. But there's normally space, you know. And if it gets very busy, well, then we just ask someone if they can wait till the next time. In addition, we do completely open walks for the public as well. I believe that's correct, Leanne.
Yes. And I'm sorry, I'm also put in a question from Imelda from Facebook, so I got a little distracted. I put it in
before you go to that. Before you go to that question, I just want to add to the comment about participation. And I'm Irwin. I'm on the board of the Wild Bird Trust. A few thoughts. Thanks, Tom. It's absolutely refreshing and gratifying to know the methodology and the kind of hindsight from your own career and your own passions that you're applying that to our systems. And to be frank, we had kind of stumbled forward over many years with our research systems, and to some degree not knowing why we were doing the research. And so I'm grateful that you're bringing, that not overly stern, but just a simple structure that folks can grow from. And the board is wrapping that around with other systems. For example, folks may or may not know that Ernie Kennedy, our longtime site manager, he's retired, and notably his replacement will have a job title change, and that's restoration and site manager. So it's really not just looking at the operating and the maintenance of the site, but thinking more about research programs. And that person's coming on in the next couple of months, and maybe a third will be the same as Ernie's old role, but a third will be managing research programs. And so the bird counts are one of our research programs. And so it's really important timing that, Tom, you're kind of challenging us to think more around how and why and what we're doing. And I would say that another staffing change that impacts this is Marissa, who's been with us for about 6 months. She is going to be the assistant restoration site manager starting October 1st. She'll be full-time for 6 months, and her job is to build and design that training program so that folks don't necessarily have to go to the bird counts, but they can go to birding workshops. They can participate in different activities on site, almost in a way like a certification program. So for example, if we had complex, rigorous work to be done, we might reach out to a few people who have had a year or two of experience, or who may have taken 4 or 5 of our other workshops. So Marissa will be managing that and helping folks kind of build their knowledge, and really have a kind of a citizen science approach. So I'm really excited about that the Wild Bird Trust is allocating the staffing resources to support these higher ambitions about why and how we're doing research.
Can I briefly respond? I'm just going to say that my first mentor was a Cambridge prof, and he's exceptionally successful. And he always used to scream, "What is the question?" That was where he began with everything. It was, "What is your goal?"
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what I was hoping to sort of remind us about with the bird counts, because we do them because we like counting birds, but they're so valuable in and of themselves, just as a long-term database. We just need to remember why we do them, so we can use them in that way. So that's really grand. Yeah. Thank you, Owen, for your comments as well. I think that there's a lot of promise there. Just another comment to mention, you can work quite successfully as an ecological consultant just by being able to count birds. So if you want to, you can go to various different projects around BC and be employed to go and spend a couple of months walking transects and counting birds to determine essentially what the impact would be of development work. So, it's interesting you mentioned the certifications, because that would be good for any age, any person who just likes being outdoors. You can go and contribute in that way.
Yeah.
I can actually dovetail this into the question that we had on Facebook about do this kind of surveying outside of Maplewood Flats. Yes, absolutely, you can. Just go to the BC Bird Atlas page, and you'll see all the different areas of BC that they want people to go and do these bird counts in. And they're trying to build up a sort of team of volunteers who just go and do this as their hobby, like geocaching or something. You just pop out to a square and you do a bird count, and then that's going to contribute to their database. And Maplewood Flats is contributing to that too.
Yeah, I think the updating, I know when the last 4 years, some of our members have been confused or felt alienated from this new approach of really saying, what is the question? And maybe we've disrupted some of the things that people are used to at the flats. But I think equally the flip side is that, for example, the important bird areas. We're within the important bird areas, the IBA. And I remember 2 or 3 years ago, the email coming in saying, you know, we've heard nothing from Maplewood Flats. Are you not interested in participating in the IBA? And I was like, wait. Of course we are. And then I look around and going, what's the data that we have to share? How are we collecting data? So, you know, I think now we're in the position, as you say, to actually be contributing and recognizing that with contemporary technology, there's all kinds of passive data collection happening via the users of the site. And we were invisible to that. In fact, not scientific, but well, not per se scientific, I was going to say, but the Instagram, you know, people are posting hundreds and hundreds of photographs of birds on the Instagram, tagging Maplewood Flats. And we were oblivious to it. And same with eBird and eNaturalist. All that data is surrounding us and we were not engaging with it. So it's super exciting. Obviously, I'm a data geek, and I'm really excited about the future with the Habitat Committee and with the staff support to be able to really think about where are we going and be able to show to funders, this is why we exist. This is our methodology. This is what we do at the site. And here's a restoration project. Here's what we know about the site. Here's what we think we can learn if we do a research project. Here's the outcomes we're looking for. So without the kind of data and the research plans, how can we get there? And equally, when we partner with your students or BCIT students, what protocol do we have? What liability do we have? What data sharing do we have? I just saw a report today, a data visualization of our site with the Spartina, and I'd never seen that. And there was this data visualization of our site with data that someone had captured, but didn't think that our committee would want to see it. So again, what's the protocol for data sharing and research projects and orientation, so that if you want to research on the site, there's a particular program that you might follow or a workshop that you attend before you go ahead and do your field work on Maplewood Flats. Thoughts on methods and.
I agree. I think that's really nice. I think that people know that we are there and we're trying to incorporate the research. And, you know, if you want to just go out and very, very, very casually commit to account, you're very welcome. We're not saying that because we're changing the protocols, you're not. You know, I think that you talked about our goals. And for me, the goal of managing the site and helping restoration, but incorporating our local community really seems to be a very strong mantra at the present point. And so if we're designing bird counts, we need to be doing that with them too. So, you know, I perceive it as really great. I can help bring in students and youth is my goal. I think we have very strong goals to try and partner with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation as well, and bring on board the community to work with us on some of these research projects. So fingers crossed we can manage that. So shall we call it a night? Say thank you to everyone here who spent their time listening to me. Sorry if I prattled on about count methodology.
This is great. Great information, and great to bring to the Habitat Committee for more exploration. Really appreciate this. Thanks.
It was fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I hope we can bring you exciting information about what birds we do have and what's happening in the future when we get into the data.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.